As we think at UNCW, and I think at many universities, what do we want students to take away from our university as far as skills around the use of AI?
Welcome to Here's the Deal, teaching and learning by design at UNCW and beyond, a podcast brought to you by the Office of Distance Education and E-Learning at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. Our podcast explores innovation, best practices, and bold ideas in teaching, learning, course design, and educational technology, both here at UNCW and across the wider higher education landscape. I'm your host, Jennifer Sias, a senior instructional designer at DEeL. Thank you for joining us for Episode 5, Artificial Intelligence. Just before this semester began, UNCW's College of Science and Engineering and the Center for Teaching Excellence co-sponsored a bootcamp called Disruption with Purpose, Teaching, Learning, and Research in the Age of AI. The series was organized by Dr. Erica Noles, Senior Lecturer in Psychology and Assistant Director of SAIL, Seahawks Advancing Interdisciplinary Learning. This fabulous bootcamp brought together faculty, staff, and thought leaders to reimagine the role of AI in teaching, learning, research, and student support. Over 3 days, participants explored how generative AI tools are shaping learning environments and academic integrity, and how we as educators can adapt with intention and creativity. In this episode, I'll be joined by a senior instructional designer, Zach Morgan, and 3 bootcamp presenters, Dr. Erica Noles, Dr. Lance Cummings, and Dr. Chip Phillips, whose voice we heard at the top of this episode. Together, we will unpack their insights on AI's impact in the classroom, ethical AI issues, student engagement, and emerging tools. Whether you're brand new to AI or already are experimenting with it in your teaching, this episode offers ideas and practical advice for moving forward with intention and purpose. Let's dive in with our first guest, Dr. Erica Noles, the bootcamp's organizer. I asked Dr. Noles to tell me about how she first began using and integrating AI in her classes. And she actually started out being a little averse to AI and allowing students to use it.
There was one semester where I thought no was the answer. Then in last fall, because I participated in the CTE AI initiative in the summer of 24. So in the fall of 24, I showed up and said, hey guys, you still can't use it to write work to submit to me. You're seniors, I only grade your work. So I kept academic integrity that I think we all cherish in the process. But I said, hey, I'm going to give you some flexibility. What I need you to do is try to use it, experiment, and report to me what you're doing. I need transparency. You want to be scientists, you want to be practitioners. I'm training healthcare providers, mental health providers. Transparency and honesty is crucial. And so by hitting those values of what hopefully I share with all of them in the class, they were really honest with me. Some were hesitant to use it, and then others kind of dove in. And so by seeing that, kind of setting the guardrails and saying, here's why, here's how, I had a decent success of them experimenting ethically and pretty most part responsibly. And so in the last spring, I formalized it a bit more, and I really moved into having a strong syllabus policy and an AI disclosure with every assignment. And then I've had students who, of course, used AI and told me they didn't, because I see words like canonical show up in psychology papers, and that's not a word we use in our field. Again, one of my favorite was that according to an article in the 1980s, he was very concerned, one extension for the future is to look at how social media will impact dating relationships, which I'm pretty sure that Jeffrey Simpson in 1980 was not concerned about social media and dating. So of course I see those things pop up, but I have moved much more to sort of, hey, I suspect that this might not be yours, so I'm going to put a temporary 0 in there, but I need by X date for you to reach out and let me know, because I do not think we can accuse them. We do not have the data to accuse them. Turnitin is not a valid, reliable source of data. So I think that faculty need to be very careful about saying, well, it says you did it, so I know you did it. That is absolutely not. I have one of my strongest students ever. Her paper was 98% flagged as AI. It was not written by AI. I have a colleague who's trying to get papers submitted in a science journal who cannot get their sentences approved because the editors keep telling her her own sentences are written by AI. She's an expert in her field.
So these tools aren't foolproof. And, we subscribe to Turnitin at the university, and one can use it as a system that raises red flags. But a human needs to verify. And like you said, have that all-important conversation with the student. Can they tell you about the paper without having it right in front of them?
And the second part, which I was being a wordy birdie, but the excellent side, like the feedback, students want to feel trusted. I feel like there's almost a parenting motto of like, a child will sort of turn out how you treat them. And so if we treat them like criminals, if we treat them like deceptive, con artists, we may actually create this reality in the interactions we have with them. But if we create them as like, I joke about, like, we're 360-degree humans, all these things happening, and we're in beta mode. We're always a version of our software that probably has some bugs and needs some updates and needs some fixes. So if we treat them that way and we make policies, they seem to respond well. And I've only had one issue where the student wouldn't admit they used AI, but they did accept the 0. So I feel like, but I think they respond well to being treated like responsible humans and being taught how to behave responsibly. So we have to.
Dr. Noles mentioned Turnitin, a tool UNCW subscribes to that can be used in Canvas. Turnitin is a tool for instructors to use, but it isn't meant to be a standalone arbiter of plagiarism. As Turnitin's own guides point out, careful consideration of context and the student's intent must be part of trying to determine whether plagiarism has occurred. Instructors have to consider whether a student's submission aligns with their previously submitted work, like Erica said. Is this the kind of language or vocabulary the student has used before? Or are there key words that don't sound like that student's previously submitted work? Instructors need to consider how sources are integrated into the submission. Is there a bibliography, a works cited page? And did the student include in-text citations? And what is the student's understanding of academic integrity? Now, this episode isn't intended as a deep dive into all things Turnitin. So if you have any questions about the tool, we would invite you to review our Turnitin resources, which are available via the DEeL tutorial portal, available on our website. And you can always contact us at elearning@uncw.edu. Now, let's turn back to the conversation on how various faculty began using AI and integrating it into their coursework. A UNCW professor of English, Dr. Lance Cummings, has experimented with using tools like GPTs in place of traditional portfolios. I asked him to talk about the class in which he began rethinking his portfolio strategy and using AI for workflow.
The way I structured this course was that we really wanted students to think about writing as a workflow and not as just a task that you do and that you hand over to AI. So our very first assignment was a workflow analysis. They actually kind of mapped out their writing process or workflow, even for maybe a specific thing they just recently wrote. And then we talked about at what point does it make sense to insert AI into that process? So it's not like delivering the entire task to AI, but saying, oh, you know what, AI really makes sense here because I have a hard time coming up with ideas, or I get all kinds of ideas, but I really have a hard time expressing my thesis or doing research. And so we use that as a basis for creating prompts in a structured way, which, if you want to about that a little bit more, but they actually created prompts, tested them out. We created like a knowledge base and things like that. And they also created documentation for what they were doing. So by the end of the course, they had already created a lot of work. So in general, what we found is that with AI, the better the content you give to AI, the better it produces. And so my thought was, well, one way to show students that is to have them actually try it out. And so if the portfolio is not turning out very well, might want to rethink what's in the portfolio or what's in your prompt.
I also asked Lance to talk about the outcome of his students' work after using AI.
Using AI to create a portfolio is pretty experimental at this point, and I wouldn't say it's awesome yet, but basically, students are taking their portfolio, uploading it to, I was using Claude, and then creating a prompt, then that would code out a website that was pretty decent. And I would say what's interesting is it didn't necessarily take the entire works and put it where you could click through it. So that would be your typical portfolio that I would have students make. They would create a web page or a simple, I've been using like Notion, Loop, that kind of thing, where it's just a place where you have the document and then you can click on, people can go in and click on the things that they're interested in seeing, along with a reflection and some contextualization of the different pieces. And what the AI did was kind of the contextualization, but then it would take bits and pieces from the work that they had as part of the illustration, if they did well with the prompt and if the content was good. And so it didn't deliver like the entire work, but I mean, honestly, employers don't read entire portfolios. That's what research says. They actually scan them and they want to see a variety of work. And really, in a lot of ways, that frame that we use in the portfolio is more important than really the content itself in some ways. And so what I could really see students doing with this is taking that code or that page that the AI created and actually building onto it, linking out to the works that they had. And I would say that the AI did a really good job of like re-articulating the things that they learned. In a sense, they probably did a really fast reflection. We did it in class, we talked about it and all that, and the AI was able to take, their 250, 500 word quick reflection in combination with the work that they did to create a really interesting articulation of what they had learned and what that might mean for their audience, as long as the prompt is good, right? So like, as long as the AI knows who they're targeting and what they want to accomplish with the portfolio, which is typically what I'm missing in portfolios, because students are like, all I got to do is like maybe do a few revisions and throw it in this portfolio and say, this is the work I did for this class, without thinking about like who in the work world would be interested in seeing that portfolio and why. So in a way, it gets them more focused on that aspect of the portfolio process. And that's probably the biggest change that I saw with the specific portfolio activity.
Hearing about how faculty started learning about and using AI in their classes is fascinating. Dr. Erica Noles, again, who organized the boot camp, mentioned 3 books that have been instrumental in her understanding of AI. 1. Teaching with AI, a practical guide to a new era of human learning by Jose Antonio Bowen and C. Edward Watson. 2. Co-Intelligence, Living and Working with AI by Ethan Mollick. And 3. More Than Words, How to Think About Writing in the Age of AI by John Warner. I asked her to reflect on their influence on her approach to AI in teaching.
Read the first one last summer, and I think that helped me realize the teaching with AI, that we could actually use it to help us innovate. I don't know that the old way that we did education was actually that great. We sort of ensconced the old ways as the good old days, but I don't think they were that good. I don't think 2 tests and an essay was actually a great pedagogical system. Like, as a psychologist, evidence-based learning strategies, that's not on the list. So it helped me realize that we could use it to be a great innovator to improve education. Ethan Mollick blew my mind, especially thinking of AI as sort of the eager assistant, but who needs a lot of directions. Like, AI is willing to do a lot of stuff, but don't trust it, but bring it to the conversation. And then my last book, I read John Warner just recently. He's very skeptical, but he helped me be more skeptical, to really think about the why. And that was one thing I brought up repeatedly.
Yes.
Like, we as educators need to know our why. Why are we having them write? Do they need to write it? Or could they make a video? Could they make a podcast? Like, why are we doing what we're doing? So I think all of those books, I'd love to have all those authors in one place. If we could get a podcast with them all together.
Right.
But yeah, I think they really helped me shape the possibilities that are out there.
If you're interested in the books that Erica referenced, take a look at our podcast website. This episode, like the others, is accompanied by a list of resources related to the episode's topic. So, how might a faculty member get started? I asked an instructional designer on the DEeL team what skills he thought faculty need right now as they contemplate AI and its impact and possible uses in the classroom. Zach Morgan is the Quality and Training Coordinator for DEeL and a Senior Instructional Designer.
I think in that question, the words right now are what jump out at me because there are so many different directions that you could go with this topic of generative AI and how it impacts and intersects with higher education. And that can be a little bit overwhelming when we think about faculty development and training and what do instructors need to have at the ready in order to adjust to this new reality. I do think there are a few starting points that we try to think about in not only our training, but our consultation as well. And really this starts with what I would call just a foundational understanding and familiarity with how these tools work. And there are some great resources out there. A colleague of mine, Brittany Dennings, put together a LinkedIn learning path that has some wonderful resources, and we'll be able to share that out with faculty. But just understanding, especially in the case of these now seemingly ubiquitous chatbots, how they actually work, how they can be useful, how they can be deceptively unhelpful, or how sometimes they may not work the way we expect them to work. And I think that foundational understanding can come through training. It can also come through trial and error. It can come through learning. But spending some time with the tools is often the best way to gain that sort of first foothold in understanding how they work and how they might be used by students and also by faculty. And that second point I'll zero in on a little bit is an understanding of how and why your students may be using these tools. So, you may not feel comfortable putting your actual assignment into a tool, and there's certainly some things to think about in terms of privacy and which tool you're using, and are you using a tool that has commercial data protection like Copilot here at UNCW. But you can start to think about the ways and start to experiment with the ways that a student might use it, and then think about whether those myriad ways are going to be helpful for promoting learning or if they're going to be a hindrance to it, and then adjust accordingly. And then finally, I would say we come back to some sort of AI agnostic skills, but ones that are still important when we're talking about anything related to course design. And those are skills and moves like alignment and aligning back to our core objectives and thinking about the alignment of materials and activities and assessments and tools, and also transparency and really making that design of the course and the decisions we've made as course designers or as faculty as clear and as transparent as possible to students.
Similarly, I asked faculty members Erica Noles and Lance Cummings what advice they might offer faculty. First, Erica Noles.
Just get in there and use it. I have a skeptical faculty member who texted me earlier who's super excited because they're using it in their personal life or something. And they're like, it's really not that scary. And I'm like, yay. So those small steps. So I think just use it as one of them. And then just start your first brainstorming session with it. And I was joking at the boot camp of like, pick the assignment that you hate the most, that you just, we often have assignments where we think it's important, but I really hate grading this one, or I really don't like this one. Start with the one that you just wish you could get rid of, but you need it for X or Y. Tell AI X or Y. Why is this important? But why don't you like it? And start with that one. And then I really hope everybody puts the stoplight policy wherever. I'm really hoping if I could have one ask for all our faculty members, it's that every assignment just tells students how they can use AI and why. Why is this the policy for this assignment? I would love to see worldwide adoption of that system.
And next, Lance Cummings.
Don't get overwhelmed. And I would just focus on one specific thing or problem or task that you think AI would really help with, either for yourself or your students, and then focus on getting that to work. I think oftentimes the issue is that we think, oh, well, we need to add AI everywhere into the course. And I don't think that's necessary. In fact, I probably don't use AI as much in my classrooms as people maybe think I do. So people are finding that in the real world, in the professional world, the business world, is that, you don't just go use AI because it's there, but you're thinking about a specific problem or thing that you struggle with and then working with AI to do that. Because there is, I would say, a learning curve, or just like any other skill, repetitions or reps,
Sure.
that you have to do to kind of get a sense of how this works. And if you're trying to do that with everything, it can be overwhelming. And so I would pick something that's like a really high value. So for example, for me, giving students feedback early on their drafts is really high value and also very intensive work for me. And so taking the time to write out a prompt, to test it, to give it to students, to revise the prompt, to add knowledge, and to constantly kind of upkeep that is really worth it, because in the end, it does improve their writing. It does save me time. It gives me the time to do the more enjoyable things, like talk about more specific things about their writing that we all find more interesting. Pick a model and kind of stick with it for a while and see how it works.
As with most things, being intentional is key. You don't have to do all the things. Pick one thing and make sure it aligns with your course objectives. You don't want to waste precious time and energy on a novelty. The importance of alignment was reiterated in my conversation with Zach Morgan.
I think alignment is such a key piece of this. And when we say alignment, what we mean is, do all of the items that we put in our course, are they all supporting our end goal for the students in terms of the knowledge and skills and attitudes that we want them to walk away with? And when you're incorporating AI or making any change to assignment, we always want to engage in that process of starting with the end in mind and then working backward to make sure that all of our efforts are headed in the right direction. I also think it's one of those situations where if you are considering swapping out an old assignment for a new AI-informed assignment, or modifying perhaps a particular type of assignment in your course, in a way it's kind of like if you're doing some work on your car, you've already got the hood open, maybe you're checking the oil, you might as well check some of the other fluids and things like that while you're in there. And so, right, this may be a good time to kind of revisit that idea of alignment, and also to think about validity. And, I know our faculty audience is very familiar with validity in the context of scholarly research and the work that they do as scholars. But we think about it in terms of assessment too, and we think about construct validity. And is the assessment really and truly measuring what we want it to measure? And when we think about adding this layer of AI, we want to think about, is the addition of that AI layer still measuring what we want it to measure? Is it still validly getting students to engage in the types of demonstration that would give us evidence that they can really do what we want to be assessing, and that they're providing that to us? My other pieces of I suppose, strategies or advice here would be perhaps to start slowly and maybe to pick either one assignment or one type of assignment to work on at a time, to be transparent about the changes you're making and why you're making them, and to then leverage that to get some feedback from your students. And this doesn't have to be formal end of course evaluation feedback. It could be a brief survey, perhaps the week or the week after the new assignment gets rolled out, but to really get some student feedback and adopt that attitude of co-creation, because we are all still learning this together, and the student perspective can really be valuable in calibrating what your next steps might be.
Zach wasn't the only one to stress alignment with course objectives. Dr. Chip Phillips, Assistant Dean of Students, Academic Honor and Community Standards, and the voice we heard at the top of the episode, emphasized that while we want students to be creative, we also need clear learning objectives. He spoke about how to uphold academic standards even when AI is part of the coursework.
I think when you think about sort of that big picture, I think most important, you want to define sort of like clear learning goals and sort of keep the focus on skills and not just like the outputs, right? So instead of grading maybe only like a final essay, maybe assess how well a student used AI to refine their ideas or gather perspectives or structure their argument, right? So it's just sort of getting out of the traditional paradigm of education that I think we've all been living in for years and years and years, and thinking about it in a little bit different way. Much like when the internet came into existence, right? We had faculty have to shift like how our teaching looks and how we're getting students to process that information. I think also establishing sort of ethical and quality sort of guidelines are really important to maintaining standards. So I'd say transparency. Students should disclose when and how they're using AI, right? And I think that, again, creating that safe space and opening up that conversation with students, like, hey, let's talk about how you're using it in the class, and this is how we can use it. Think sort of critical evaluation, and what I mean by that is requiring students to verify AI generated content and explain why they kept it, or maybe why they discarded it, or why they decided to not use it. So again, just kind of thinking about the AI content itself. And that gets students just, I think, also thinking critically, which is what we're hoping to have them do as well. I think making it clear that AI can assist, but it can't necessarily replace their voice, right? I think that's one of the distinguishing factors when you think about AI use. And what a lot of instructors want is they want students to use it as a tool, right? But they don't want it to take the voice of the student. We want to hear from you, right? What the student. The AI can make your voice sound different or enhance it, but it still should be you. So having that ownership component, I think, is important. I would also say AI is really good as kind of a creative partner, is the way I would describe it. And so not using it as a crutch because you don't want to do your work or you don't know how to do it, but using it to sort of help you do your work. I think a lot of students are doing this. It's a good springboard for creativity to get you like thinking in some different ways. But you don't want it to, again, be the crutch to only use it to think. You don't want it to think for you, is I guess what I'd say to that. I think we also just need to shift sort of the way we assess things more towards critical thinking, which is what we want all of our students to come away with. And so maybe grade on how students engage with the AI, reflection, evaluation, iteration. So not just like the polished output itself, because AI is going to write a grammatically perfect thing, right? But how are students engaging with it? So again, I mentioned this, but like, more like sort of oral defenses, live discussions, presentations, so students kind of have to articulate their own thinking and in their own words. And so again, going back to the assessment piece, that's going to be a better way, I think, to assess where students are at and how they're learning than your more traditional ways of doing things through like paper and pencil tests, so to speak. And also, last thing I would mention on this topic would be, I think it's really important. Again, I mentioned safe spaces, right? Kind of creating safe spaces within the classes sort of for students to experiment. And I call these a lot of times, I think, like sandbox projects, where students can freely sort of experiment with AI without worrying about a grade or pressure about an assignment. And that really kind of expands how they're learning about the topic. I think even from the instructor end, how students are using it is probably providing some education from them. And then sort of talking about it, right? How did you do that? What worked? Where do you feel like you're overly relying on the content as opposed to your own thinking? So again, that safe space and sort of experimenting with, you know, the technology, if you will.
Like Zach, Chip also stressed how important transparency is and suggested having an open conversation with students about AI.
That's probably the most important thing that you could do. Because if students don't know what the parameters are, they're going to just probably use it, thinking there are not any rules around it. And so, again, just defining what's permittable, explaining why you're doing that, providing examples, having something specifically about AI in your syllabus, I think is important. So not just in like, hey, this is the honor code, right? Right below that, have something about this is the way we use AI in here, you know. And I think it's important too for instructors, like students, instructors, they're all in the room together to start a class, or they're all online together, right? And they all know this generative AI is out there and it exists. So I think it's really important to just like create a safe space to talk about it. And don't make it this elephant in the room, like, hey, like I know as an instructor, I know everybody's using generative AI and this is what it can do. And I know many of you are using it, and like, that's okay. Like I get that. You're gonna need to know how to use it when you leave UNCW and get your degree. But let's talk about like why you're using it and how you're using it and what we're trying to accomplish in this class. I think that that'll also go a long way to making students more comfortable with it. So that if you ever have a conversation with them about their use, they maybe feel a little bit safer about talking about, well, this is how I was using it. And y'all can have an educational talk about whether that was good or bad, and how it can be done differently, I guess.
Some faculty may be reluctant to try using AI themselves or to integrate it into their courses. There are legitimate concerns surrounding AI, all kinds of ethical considerations, along with myths and misconceptions. Dr. Noles was transparent about those issues in her presentations.
The AI system, especially the large language models, because AI is such a huge term, but the large language models and the chat GPTs, I mean, they're built by exploited labor, commissioned by very wealthy corporations and often billionaires to essentially drain the water and energy of the planet, to then bake in the systematic bias that's always been there, to then set up sort of the next systems for us. Like, so when you look at AI from that lens of, wow, who built it, how, and why, it should raise a lot of questions across pretty much every sector. As an educator, I'm always thinking from an educational perspective. And so I think bringing these topics up to our students is huge, because especially as an educator in current higher ed, we have a lot of students who are very concerned about environmental and ecological impacts. And so I hear that as a social psychologist by training, I'm very concerned about the human impacts and the bias and all of those things. So I'm constantly going back and forth between thinking AI is super cool and then super terrifying simultaneously at the same time, which I think as research shows, a lot of people have high and strong positive and high strong negative feelings towards AI. Like it creates this problem within most of us where we're like, it's both cool and terrifying.
I also asked Erica about specific myths and misconceptions about AI.
I think the biggest myth is that detection or banning is a viable alternative. It's just not. I think understandably, especially from a psychological sort of perspective, like as humans, we like to have control. As educators, we like to think that we have some level of control over our classroom, of how things are going to be done. I feel like many of us did not choose to go into law enforcement, so I don't think that we want that level of control, but we're used to having a sense of knowledge and a sense of control, and AI sort of making us face this space of like, I can't control it and I don't know what it is. And so it's a natural human instinct to be like, well, then let me just know. Let me just know to that. Like if I don't know what it is and I can't control it, I don't want to deal with it. And so I absolutely understand, and I was operating in that place too, but I did have to push myself through that, because research is very, very clear that humans are not great detectors, and we will continue to get worse as natural language processing makes AI sound more and more human, and students know how to insert a few errors to make it sound like they wrote it. They know how to game the system as well. So I wish there was one myth I could get rid of, is that faculty will effectively be able to ban its use in their classroom.
To use AI or not to use AI? Well, other considerations include ethical ones: student misuse of AI, plagiarism, and equal access to the tools. My interviewees had a lot to say on this subject. First up, Chip Phillips, who, once again, is UNCW's Assistant Dean of Students, Academic Honor, and Community Standards, who talked about some trends he's been seeing.
I will start by saying students are absolutely using it, probably using it in the right way and also misusing it. And so I guess my first point would be that there is pervasive use of generative AI tools amongst our students. I want to say I read somewhere recently, close to 90% of students are using it pretty regularly in their work and in their life. And so they're definitely out there using those tools. And, the next thing to think about is, well, what are they using them for, right? And they're using them for all kinds of purposes. But a lot of them come down to the generative AI aspect of the writing. Like they're using them to research and write their papers, assignments, discussion board chats, organizing what they're doing in their classes. And so they're definitely using it. Say and that can be for good and bad. And so on the bad side is the other trend is you're just seeing more and more misuse and sort of academic integrity violations. Also read somewhere recently, like professors have also seen the same thing, right? Their students they're reading through all the papers and they're like, these aren't the students, these are AI generated. And so that's certainly creating some frustration for them about, how am I going to reformulate my class? What am I going to do about this, right? I can't turn in all 50 students every time I have a class and an assignment. And so kind of leads into, from the faculty side, another issue, which and trend is they're just kind of getting frustrated and burnt out dealing with the issue. And how are they going to shift how they're dealing with AI in the classes? And how are they going to deal with the detection? Because, we have tools like here at UNCW that'll help you detect AI. There's ones out on the web, but those aren't always the most effective ways to detect AI. They have false positives. There's some universities that I've heard of that don't even let their faculty use them, or they don't want them used when it comes to academic integrity because they can be unreliable. So with those limitations, faculty kind of feel like, well, what am I supposed to do? I read this, I feel like it's AI. Well, here at UNCW, you can use a tool, and if you do use a tool, and I feel like it's telling me it's 100% AI, and I also believe, based on my intuition, it's AI, we have a problem here. And if the student's pushing back, well, I think they're lying, right? And so it's just another trend from the faculty side of being there's that frustration about what can we do if this is the case. More philosophically, I think a trend is amongst the faculty and particularly the universities is this idea of, is AI a learning tool, and how do we incorporate it into our teaching, right? And so if using it is not going to be cheating, what is cheating, what isn't when you're using AI? And that's kind of a bigger question that I think people are wrestling with, particularly within different disciplines, because what someone's doing in a math class might be very different than what someone's doing in an English class, right? And how they might be using the tools.
Zach Morgan also weighed in on concerns he's heard from faculty about the use of AI.
The biggest concern that I have heard, both here at UNCW and beyond, is the very understandable concern that students are cheating, that they are using these tools to subvert the original intent of the assignment and the kind of learning that the instructor hoped would happen. Now, there are many reasons why this may be happening, and not all of them are malicious. There's a great book by James Lang called Cheating Lessons that really, it is a pre-AI publication date, but it goes into the many, many reasons why students may not adhere to the academic integrity expectations that the faculty has in their mind about the assignment. But I also think that's a very understandable and almost a very personal concern because of the time that faculty put into developing valid and reliable assessments and the time that they put into grading and feedback, and to not feel certain that the work you're grading was actually done by your students can be really demoralizing. And so that concern of cheating is something that we are definitely hearing a lot from instructors. And in some ways, AI presents some unique challenges in that area. And in others, some of the strategies that we may rely on to mitigate that risk are the same strategies that we would rely on in any modern era of higher education.
I also talked to English professor Dr. Lance Cummings, from whom we heard earlier, about AI and ethics.
I think the key, really the ethical area is kind of pretty gray area, and a lot of people are figuring it out, right? So I don't pretend to have all the answers. I think the important thing for me is to be transparent and open in the classroom. So, make it a safe place to talk about AI. If somebody uses AI unethically, I don't necessarily, I don't punish them for it. We talk about it. I do have an open AI policy, so, I let them use AI however they want. I just, reserve the opportunity to talk about how they used it. And also I do a lot of collaboration in the classroom. That's probably one of the biggest changes I've made is do a lot of synchronous writing in the classroom, a lot of times in teams. So even if they're writing things personally, they're working together as teams. And so I can actually see them writing and coach them on their writing. Or if they pull up AI and they're using AI, I can watch them use it, and then I can coach them on how they're using it. If they're using it, I won't even say, ethically, but also effectively, and we can talk about it as a class too. So if something interesting comes up. And in a sense, I believe that's the major shift in education that needs to happen, is that going from content-based teaching to coaching. And that's the value we as humans bring to the classroom. It's not the content knowledge, I don't think, but more of how we can coach students to use that content knowledge in useful ways. And that's also something that, AI necessarily can't do on its own. The other thing is just to bring them up with the specific tasks that we do. So I think one of the best lessons that I had, or assignments that I had that taught ethics, was the ethics of AI use, was having students create their own chatbots. And, one of the things with your chatbot is you can upload knowledge to that chatbot to have it focus on something specific. So instead of, you could make an AI writing tutor chatbot and it relies on whatever default training, random stuff from the internet it happens to have in its training. It will do that. Or you could upload like a specific textbook or all your lessons, and then it's going to reference that stuff first before it references the other stuff. While I have students in one of my classes make their own chatbot, and they can upload things, but then we can ask, well, okay, is it ethical to upload this? Is this your stuff or somebody else's stuff? Okay, well, if you do use it, does the AI cite that stuff? Now, is that okay? And there's no real answers to a lot of this, but I think it gets them thinking about, should they just upload stuff? And also they upload their own writing to the chatbot to create these. And so, do they want other people to upload their own writing to the chatbot? Is a question to ask. And so I find just working with AI with real tasks is very useful for getting them to think through the ethics.
I also talked to my interviewees about broader ethical considerations related to AI. Dr. Erica Noles brought up the very real issue of the environmental and human costs of AI, what it takes to create these tools, and their impact.
I know OpenAI was originally out of Kenya, and that was the first group of folks who were paid approximately $2-ish an hour to see and look at some of the most heinous things ever done and created by humans, to hopefully, for those of us who are going to be users, filter out those terrible things. But similar to social media, because it's a similar claim that's been against me at the social media people, that we use vulnerable populations to do the dirty work so that we can benefit. And I mean, we've seen that from the sort of dawn of human existence, but I'm living in the current era, and these things really bother me because it's not fair to do that. I know it has to be done. I don't have a solution, but I don't believe that the way it has been done is fair.
Gosh, I hadn't thought of that. That there do have to be filters, actual human filters, to filter out harmful material. And evidently, it has been done by folks who historically have been exploited in one way or another for centuries. And then there are environmental considerations. I heard at an earlier workshop that every time someone asks a question of a tool like ChatGPT, it causes water to be wasted or used. Now, that sounded like some specious claim. So, ironically, I asked ChatGPT, is it true that water is used in running a ChatGPT query? And ChatGPT told me that the answer is, quote, yes, indirectly. Running a ChatGPT query or any large AI model uses electricity, and most electricity production and the cooling of data centers involves water. Now, I'm still quoting from ChatGPT. Cooling servers. Data centers run hot, so many use water cooling systems directly or through electricity demand for cooling. Electricity generation. A large share of power plants, especially thermoelectric ones like coal, natural gas, and nuclear, consume water for steam generation and cooling. End quote. So when you run a ChatGPT query, it doesn't literally use water in the sense of pouring water onto a chip, but it does contribute to water consumption through the energy and the cooling systems that support the infrastructure. Now, there is speculation and disagreement about how much water is actually used per inquiry, but suffice it to say, these tools do have environmental impact. And this brings me back to something Chip Phillips said, as he noted, the campus-wide AI conversations we still need to have because there are still other considerations like equity and access.
I think we obviously need to continue the discussion about academic integrity and assessment. We've talked a lot about that today. How do we sort of redefine plagiarism and originality in an age where AI can just generate essays, for computer scientists code, research ideas, things like that? Should we shift our assessment more towards, again, I mentioned like discussions, in person, sort of project-based evaluations? And do we need to think about what's our policy on AI assisted work, right? So if it's homework, if it's a take-home exam, you know, where is AI and how can we use it? And so again, that's going to be an ongoing conversation. I think there's a equity and access sort of component to this too that we need to continue to think about. A lot of these sites are free, but a lot of them you can pay for greater access and a better technology, if you will. And so students that have the means to do that and potentially use things in ways that are even harder to detect or in ways that they shouldn't be, versus a student who can't necessarily afford to get the highest end of Grammarly, so to speak. And so making sure that AI doesn't sort of widen the gap between students that have better access to tools, trainings, and those sorts of things than those that don't. I think we also need to keep talking about first generation students and our underserved students. Are they benefiting from AI rather than being left behind, right? And so I think that incorporating those populations into the conversation is going to be important as well. And then think systematically from a university-wide standpoint, should universities provide more campus-wide AI tools and prescribe what those should look like to try to level the playing field for everybody, so both faculty, staff, and students? I think that We're going to continue to see faculty workload and roles. I think that's going to continue to evolve. And so you're seeing this some in the news now, like how AI is changing how teaching happens. I know there's actually been some complaints recently. I've read articles about how students have complained about faculty's use of AI, and like I'm just getting taught that something I could learn from a robot online.
Mm.
And the faculty members just taking all this material from ChatGPT and passing it along to us. And so, what skills do faculty need to teach in this new AI sort of environment? And then, what kind of training and support as a university should we be providing for educators to sort of responsibly know how to use it and incorporate it into their own work and into their teaching? And one of the things with AI in particular, you have a lot of data privacy issues. And so the ethics around that. So anytime, for example, you use ChatGPT, that's going into ChatGPT's little database, right? And so if you're putting personal information or information about your work or school in there and using it, it's collecting that information, right? And so making sure that people understand that that's the case and the risks of uploading sensitive things into these systems should certainly continue to be an issue.
So, as Chip noted, there is much fodder for continued conversations around AI ethical considerations. And the same is true of the enormous opportunities AI offers the campus community. Erica Noles lit up as we talked about some ways in which her students' performance have been improved by the integration of AI in her classes.
I think it can really actually help us improve student competence, autonomy, and relatedness. It's almost counterintuitive as the digital era makes it seem. One success I've really had is coming up with worksheets and sort of outlines and ways for students to approach challenging readings, because I do teach an upper level science course, and some of the things that I have students read are very hard. And as we understand that students' literacy rates have been changing, and then COVID has sort of done a lot to where we think students may be in their literacy, can we use AI to create scaffolded opportunities? Because it's kind of a hot topic right now, scaffolding. And then on your last podcast, you talked a lot about authentic assessment. I think AI can both help scaffold learning, and my students really loved it. I mentioned in my workshop, I took this challenging article, I worked with AI to break it down into something really approachable, and then I said, y'all tell me the truth. Did you actually read the hard stuff? And they're like, yes, and they appeared, and I wasn't grading them on it, they appeared more motivated to read the hard stuff because they felt like they had that scaffolding. They could go make sure they were right, and they have this idea they can read wrong, which I don't like, but I get it. And so I think that we can use it to create competence and to give them more options, because I like them to take assignments and explore their interest in their career. I can't do that. I don't know what it's like to be a mental health therapist. I'm an educator. So I think that we can actually use AI to do some really cool stuff, but we got to get our heads in the game and we really got to get creative.
Likewise, Lance Cummings spoke about opportunities AI offers, and I asked him to share some tools he's been using with students.
The Gamma app is definitely worth checking out for students. I was using it before they incorporated AI, and the whole idea is to kind of ease the burden of design choices and focus more on content. So you can literally write out your content in Markdown, which is just a simple Markdown language, and then paste it in there. Or like you said, put your Word document and it just creates these slides, even without AI. But now they've incorporated AI, and it will kind of guess at what different visualizations would work best for different things and formats. And it's gotten really good. I mean, it wasn't great to start out with, but it's slowly gotten better and better. And the free version in general works pretty well. You can actually, on the paid version, create your own web pages, which I've done a little bit as well. I don't know if you can do that on the free version as well. But yeah, I kind of forget to mention Gamma sometimes because it's so integrated into my workflow that it's, I don't even I hardly consider it an AI tool, even though that's kind of how they sell it. The other, the other thing that I focus on is I tell people just choose one of the main models to use on a consistent basis, and try it out for at least a couple weeks, maybe even 30 days, and work with it consistently to solve specific problems or specific things that you want to solve. and get a feel for it. And then you kind of just pick the model that seems to work the best for the things that you do. You know, you don't have to be a power user that uses all of them. I currently use Claude. I used to use ChatGPT all the time, and before ChatGPT came up with projects feature, I switched to Claude to try their projects feature, which basically means that you can upload knowledge based around a specific topic or project and then chat just within that knowledge. And it worked really well for me. And I also, Claude writes, seems to have a better writing mind or whatever than ChatGPT, whereas ChatGPT does pretty good with analysis. And so that's what I use now for, and then of course, BootleBox is the other one, which really you could probably just use BootleBox as well, because you can use all the paid models in there for $20 a month if you want to pay, which is the typical going price. So you would get all the paid models. And that's the other one I pay for. I mean, that and Gamma might be the only two ones I pay for, and then and Claude. But you can access Claude in BootleBox. It's just like I happen to have gotten used to some of the knowledge features. But you can upload knowledge into BootleBox as well. And the free version works pretty well, as it simply limits how many paid messages you can have. You can still actually access those paid models for free, just up to a certain point. Now, this is really nice for students, for the classroom, because students can see the difference, can test it out and see the differences between models. That's one of the things that we did in my class, was they took a prompt and tested it out with different models, both paid and free. And really, you can only do that in Boodle. Well, maybe there's other things out there, but really a Boodle is the really easy place to do that. The other thing I like about BootleBox is that you can have a collaborative chat, so you can have more than one people in the chat, the AI chat, and then you can actually prompt more than one AI. So you really get a sense of that AI is a collaborative act. And that's really been my approach to AI. I think in general, working with AI and even understanding AI is a collaboration. If you want AI to work in a professional setting, it's going to be a team effort. And I would say in a classroom setting, personally, myself as well. And then the other thing BootleBox recently added was the ability to create your own chatbots. And you can actually share that with students for free. They may have to sign up for an account, I'm not sure, but they don't have to pay to access those. And it's also a little bit more secure because there's the API between BootleBox and whatever model you're using. And also the knowledge, they vectorize all the knowledge first. So then when you prompt it, it searches the knowledge and adds it to the prompt. So you're not actually sending, if you're uploading a document to BootleBox, you're not sending it to the AI. It's only going to send the relevant chunks during the prompting process. So it's a nice, secure way to do that. And those are the main.
Let me ask you, Lance, for our audience members, what do you mean by vectorize?
Yeah, I have a post on this, but so basically that's how it's been trained too. It takes all this text and I'm not a computer engineer, so I don't fully understand it, but it actually turns it into numbers, which vectors a certain mathematical equation with our vectors. Probably the most important thing to understand is that it's chunking that content so that it can process it easier. And the thing is that when you have AI or whatever you're using to vectorize it, chunk your content, it's generally random. And so if you chunk your content before you give it to AI, it actually works better. But yeah, it's simply turning your content into numbers before giving it to the model. And that's really, when you prompt it, it's doing that as well, as far as I understand it. And then it looks at those vectors, and that's how it sees patterns, is it's analyzing those vectors across this whole swath of training data or whatever knowledge you upload, that kind of thing.
I also asked Lance to talk about unexpected outcomes that have emerged from integrating AI into teaching. For instance, did it result in better writing from his students?
I would say the biggest outcome that I've had has been incorporating, I don't know if it's unexpected, I suppose so at the time, because I actually entered in last year thinking, okay, I'm going to focus on students making prompts, because that's where it's at. And actually, I really didn't teach prompting much except in my writing for AI class. What I did is I created AI chatbots for my writing classes I used the structured prompting and I used specific knowledge sets around how I teach writing, and then created chatbots for specific tasks. So for example, coming up with ideas on what to write about. Like I have students write a lot in my classes oftentimes, but oftentimes like whatever they want to write about. So sometimes they have trouble, they run out of ideas. And so I have this specific heuristic that students can go through that basically gives them ideas constantly. And the AI takes them through that heuristic. So they get ideas on what to write about, but they also learn the heuristic, why they're going through it. Or I have one that focuses on giving them feedback that makes their writing more personal and human, which is what a lot of people are looking for online these days. And what I found was really a great increase in the quality of writing, not because students were generating their writing, but because they had already, in a sense, ran it by me once before they even ran it by me, So the first drafts that I was getting were higher quality, and then I could talk about other things. And this is a typical problem I have in writing classes, is that you ask for a rough draft, you really get 0 drafts. And then when you ask for a final draft, you really get rough drafts. And so that learning moment usually happens in the revision from the rough draft to the final draft. But if we're one draft behind, that gets difficult. And one of the reasons why we do portfolios, so at the end of the semester, they look at all their final drafts and then realize what they've learned and how they can improve those from what they've learned. And I was really impressed by how those chatbots help students kind of get a step ahead of things and gave me time to engage them more personally with their writing. Instead of telling all the students the same things I'm telling all the students because they're all doing the same thing more or less, we can go a little bit deeper.
I just thought that was brilliant. Think about it. When integrated strategically, AI can actually improve students' writing. Now, on the subject of AI's potential for improving processes, I asked Zach Morgan if he thought there might be opportunities for AI to enhance what we call quality assurance and/or alignment, where course design is concerned.
I think my answer here at the time of recording is maybe, and that may change as time goes by. I'm a little bit agnostic on the point right now. I've seen some custom GPTs that people have built that are purpose made for checking alignment, and you can give it a design map and have the custom GPT evaluate that design map for where there may be gaps in alignment. And I've seen those be really successful, and I've also seen them faceplant quite badly. And it's one of those situations where it may give you an idea, but the expertise still, of course, lies with the person who's teaching that course and created that map in the first place. I also think sometimes, and this is a very human tendency as well, that is shared by the AI in this case, sometimes you'll see the AI, when it looks at alignment, do what I might call fuzzy alignment or topic alignment, where it assumes that because this module is about fruit and this topic is about oranges, that therefore there's alignment there. Whereas, this module could actually supposed to be about agricultural practices. And so it just sees the sort of very surface level connection and doesn't critically evaluate it in the same way that an expert would. Now, with that said, I do think there's some interesting opportunities to leverage tools like the QM rubric, the Quality Matters rubric, which is really the gold standard for online and hybrid evidence-based practices for course design, and to combine that tool with AI tools. So for example, maybe I use AI to help me brainstorm which QM standards I really want to address through my module overview pages in my online or hybrid course. And I do a little back and forth brainstorming to think about, okay, I'm a student starting a new week. Which QM standards would be the most salient to provide to students right here at the start of a new week? And we go back and forth and we workshop that idea and we come up with a list and a solid rationale. And then maybe AI, and I'll say at this moment, ChatGPT seems to be particularly good at this. Maybe we could come up with the actual HTML code for that page. and play around with a few prototypes, perhaps that would exceed my innate coding ability at this point, but come up with a few different prototypes for how that page would look for students and accelerate that process of giving students a really professional looking page in the learning management system. So I think we'll continue to uncover this. I have some skepticism about whether the large language models will ultimately be a time saver when it comes to alignment. But again, I think as a first pass, there may be some benefit there. And certainly when it comes to thinking about the sequencing of presenting materials, and even thinking outside the box on different ways to perhaps achieve a given QM standard. QM is not prescriptive in the way that Quality Matters expects you to meet standards. The standards are in there because there's good research supporting them, but there's not one right way to meet a given QM standard. So AI could be a helpful thinking partner in terms of thinking outside the box for QM as well.
As I think about AI and its positive potential in higher education, the possibilities seem a little overwhelming, yet exciting. I think Erica Noles put it best.
There is no one way to use AI in higher ed because every discipline, every learning outcome, everything we do is individualized to the course, to the discipline, to the student, to the course. So I do not like large blanket policies or suggestions, but I'm actually hoping, like, I can speak for my field, like psychology is getting into the game of the ethics and what they want, how they want their journals. So I want to push people back to their sort of the disciplinary organizations that run them, because I often think that students don't even see themselves ensconced in these larger organizations either. And so if we can look to whatever your larger organization is to say, hey, how do you want us training the next group of folks? That would be a really great starting. Like, what does MLA say? What does APA say? What are our governing bodies saying would be a place that I would suggest everybody sort of start. The AAC&U guide, and then that LinkedIn Learning. All faculty here have access to. LinkedIn Learning has some amazing tutorials that have sort of been vetted by experts. It's a little more tailored than YouTube, but I would start there. But that AAC&U guide, I know you and I have both raved over it.
I love it.
I wish we could get I don't like killing trees, but if we could get a print copy in every student's hand at this campus, I would be so happy.
Some sage advice from Dr. Erica Noles. She mentioned the resource LinkedIn Learning. And as it so happens, UNCW has a subscription to LinkedIn Learning. And in the resource guide on our website that accompanies this episode, I've included a link to a collection of LinkedIn Learning videos on AI. As we wrap up this episode on AI, it seems fitting to let Dr. Noles have the last word. After all, she was the primary organizer of this wonderful boot camp, Disruption with Purpose, Teaching, Learning, and Research in the Age of AI, which was co-sponsored by UNCW's College of Science and Engineering and the Center for Teaching Excellence. Early on in our interview, I told Erica I'd noticed she emphasized, quote, keeping it human in her presentation when using AI in education. So, I asked her how faculty can balance the use of AI while maintaining authentic student connections.
And that's why in my talk, I've been asking those questions myself. And as a psychologist, I'm sort of looking to theories and what does the evidence say. And self-determination theory is sort of a hot topic. It's debated in my field. But I really think if we can use some of the useful parts of it, which are helping to facilitate competence, autonomy, and relatedness, whether we're employers, whether we're educators, whether we're parents, whatever role we find ourselves in, if we can really promote those around us to feel competent, autonomous, and related, we'll probably have better outcomes. And so that really, with the humanness, I'm like, how can I make my students feel related to my class? And especially in the age of AI, higher ed has to grapple with what can we provide that AI can't, because AI is a really good tutor. It can do fancy stuff. It's there at 2 a.m. when we're sleeping. So AI can, in fact, do things that faculty cannot do. So we have to ask, what can we do that it cannot do? And it cannot show up for a student and look them in the face and say, how's your mom's cancer treatment going? That's what I can do. AI doesn't look at them and be like, do you hear back from grad program? Heck yeah, you got in, high five. Of course, I'll be a recommendation for your, graduate assistant application. AI can't look at them in the eye and know what they're struggling with and what they're celebrating. And so I think I've really tried to say my students need that. We're looking at an epidemic of loneliness and connection. So I've really doubled down on getting to know my students through assignments and just walking around in class, because I think they need us to see them as humans, and we need to see them as humans, and we need them to see us as humans. So that's kind of my doubling down on humanness.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Here's the Deal. If this episode's conversation sparked new ideas or raised questions for you, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us or explore the resources mentioned via our website, https://tinyurl.com/UNCW DEeL. That's tinyurl.com/UNCW DEEL. Big thanks to Dr. Erica Noles, Dr. Chip Phillips, Dr. Lance Cummings, and Mr. Zach Morgan for sharing their insights and classroom innovations. And here is a humble, or maybe not so humble, request from me. Please share our podcast with your colleagues and friends, anyone who is interested in innovation, best practices, and bold ideas in teaching, course design, and educational technology, both here at UNCW and across the wider higher education landscape. Join us next time for Episode 6, Accessibility, where we will examine how you can ensure that your course materials like articles and videos are accessible to all learners. We'll look at universal design for learning and how it benefits all students, as well as 3 key pieces of legislation: ADA Title II, Section 504, and the DOJ Digital Accessibility Rule, and how they impact higher education and online learning. Until then, stay curious, stay collaborative, and we'll see you next time on Here's the Deal.